Have you ever wondered what happens when the person holding an entire system together is quietly pushed aside? Because someone thought a spreadsheet knew better. My name is Samuel Corbett. I'm 52 years old. And one Monday morning, I was thanked for 14 years of service, handed a manila envelope, and told my position was being eliminated. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded and said, "Understood." They thought I was broken, that I'd go home, fade into irrelevance, maybe send a few angry emails to no one in particular. But what they didn't know was that I had seen it coming. And while they were busy replacing people with dashboards and algorithms, I was building something of my own, quietly, legally, and patiently. This is the story of how I went from being fired without a second thought to becoming the only man who could save their business. But not for free. If stories of quiet revenge, sharp strategy, and poetic justice resonate with you, take a second to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more real-life stories that prove one thing: the people they underestimate are often the ones they'll need most. 14 years ago, I stepped into the procurement department at Everwell Surgical Logistics with nothing but a quiet determination and the lingering grief of a man who had just buried his daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 9. Leukemia took her in less than 8 months. In the final weeks of her life, I sat helplessly in hospital corridors watching nurses scramble equipment arrive late and critical medications delayed by logistical breakdowns. It wasn't anyone's fault, not directly. But I remember a moment, an orderly whispering to a nurse, "We're still waiting on the delivery. It should have been here yesterday." That moment stuck with me like a bone in my throat. So I left my old job in industrial supply and walked straight into the world of medical logistics. I didn't come in with fancy degrees or a 6-figure resume. I came in with purpose. I came in with questions most managers didn't bother to ask. What happens when this shipment is late? Who suffers when the wrong glove size is sent? Whose child doesn't get treatment because someone didn't follow up on a back order? Everwell was smaller then, just a mid-tier distributor for hospital systems across the Midwest. No one noticed me at first. I didn't care. I wasn't there for attention. I was there to make sure what happened to Lily didn't happen to someone else's child. I started by learning. I read every contract, sat in on every vendor call, visited warehouse sites. I didn't talk much, but I listened to everything. I built relationships, not transactional ones, but real connections. I knew which vendor rep had a sick mother in Omaha, which warehouse manager coached Little League on weekends, and which driver always showed up early without being asked. I sent Christmas cards. I picked up the phone instead of emailing. And slowly, the system began to shift. Hospitals started calling me directly, not the company line me. When a hurricane threatened a regional warehouse in Florida, I was the one who rerouted deliveries through Cincinnati overnight. When COVID hit and everything went to hell, I was already 3 steps ahead. While other firms were waiting on back orders, I had suppliers holding critical gear specifically for our hospitals, not because of contract obligations, but because they trusted me. That trust wasn't built through dashboards. It was built through late-night calls, handwritten notes, and remembering the names of people's kids. I didn't play politics. I didn't aim for titles. I just did the work. Of course, not everyone saw that as valuable. 6 months before I was let go, a new face entered the building, Kendra Vaughn, 35. MBA from Wharton. High heels, digital transformation plans, and enough confidence to fill a boardroom twice over. She came in fast, replacing division heads, introducing centralization software, and using phrases like reducing human dependency. She never once asked me what I did. She already had a theory. Old guy, old methods. We met formally once. She told me my vendor relationships were non-scalable, that we needed to automate purchasing, remove redundancy, reduce emotional inefficiencies. I nodded. And then I kept doing my job, because while she was trying to modernize the supply chain, I was still keeping it alive. In private, though, I took her seriously. I'd seen her kind before, brilliant on paper, blind in reality. I started reviewing every contract I had influence over. Many of them, thanks to the chaos of the pandemic, were already structured under flexible arrangements I had suggested. At the time, no one cared who held the contract, they just needed the supplies. So I'd taken the initiative, quietly, legally, and where possible, I had positioned my LLC Corbett MedBridge Solutions as either the cosigner or service provider on those agreements. Most people didn't even notice, but vendors did, hospital administrators did. They saw the invoices, the delivery consistency, the follow-through. They knew where their lifeline was connected, and it wasn't Everwell. It was me. Still, I never planned to use that power, not unless I had to. My job wasn't about leverage, it was about service. I believed that for a long time, right up until the moment I walked into the HR office and saw Kendra's folded hands and polite smile. That's when I knew Everwell wasn't my mission anymore. But mine wasn't over. Not yet. It happened on a Monday morning, the kind where the office coffee still tastes like weekend leftovers and the halls are too quiet. I was called into conference room 2B, windowless cold, the kind they reserve for terminations and HR briefings. Kendra was already sitting there, laptop open, notepad untouched. Beside her was Emily from Human Resources, visibly uncomfortable, clutching a folder like it might shield her from whatever fallout was coming. Sam Kendra said, smiling with the kind of corporate sympathy that's been practiced in front of a mirror, "We appreciate everything you've done for Everwell over the years." Truly. But after a thorough review of our procurement structure, we've determined that your position is no longer aligned with the company's direction. I didn't speak. Just listened, nodded slightly. Emily opened the folder and began reading terms, severance continuation of benefits access to Cobra. Kendra checked her phone twice during the conversation. When they asked if I had questions, I shook my head. No. Thank you for the opportunity, I said calmly. 14 years is a good run. Kendra seemed surprised I took it so well. She expected a fight, or maybe even a quiet breakdown. What she got instead was silence and a man already 5 steps ahead. They thought I was done. They had no idea what they had just released. Because what they didn't realize was that 3 years earlier, during the supply chain chaos of the pandemic, I'd quietly registered Corbett MedBridge Solutions, a legal and operational consulting entity focused on emergency procurement services. Back then, it was just a safeguard, a way to act more quickly when Everwell's internal systems couldn't keep up. But I'd kept it active, kept it clean. And more importantly, I'd structured key pandemic contracts to run through that name with hospital partners who didn't care about which brand sent the invoice, only that the respirators arrived on time. I walked out of that room without raising my voice, but inside, a switch had flipped. They thought they'd eliminated a cost. They had just severed their own supply chain. And the worst part was, they wouldn't know it until the ground started to shake beneath them. I returned to my desk with the quiet dignity of someone who had been preparing for a long goodbye. There were no tears, no outbursts, no farewell speeches, just the steady packing of a life's work into 2 cardboard boxes. A photo of Lily, a stack of vendor thank you cards. My old notepad with hand-drawn logistics maps and contact scribbles from back when whiteboards were more useful than dashboards. But the Rolodex stayed on the desk. Let them try to decode what those numbers meant. Before I left, I sent one message from my personal phone, not my Everwell device. It was a simple text to Eric Hale, the regional director at MedTech Surgical. Looks like things are shifting at Everwell. Might have some news soon. His response came within 5 minutes. Kendra's cleaning house, huh? I heard something. You good, I replied with 3 words. More than good. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, I had already received 2 vendor check-in calls and a voicemail from a hospital administrator in Nebraska. That was the thing no one at Everwell had understood. The system hadn't been running on them, it had been running through me. During the peak of the pandemic, when ventilators were as rare as gold and overnight shipping times doubled, I had done more than plug gaps. I had taken action that saved lives. I remember one week in particular, March 2020. A Southern Illinois hospital was completely out of PPE. Our suppliers were maxed. The chain was broken. So I did something unorthodox. I sourced gloves from a manufacturer in Guadalajara, paid the deposit out of my personal account, and had them shipped to St. Mary's Medical overnight using an independent carrier. That invoice, it didn't go through Everwell. It went through Corbett MedBridge Solutions, and the hospital never forgot it. That was the first of many such contracts. During the pandemic, I was too busy solving problems to think about credit, but I had structured each emergency transaction carefully, legally, cleanly, with language that made it clear Corbett MedBridge was the direct point of contact. By 2021, over a dozen hospitals were used to dealing with me directly. And vendors, they preferred it. I paid faster. I didn't micromanage. I knew their systems, their staff, and their pain points. I knew that when a warehouse flooded in Kansas City, Cardinal Flow had to reroute deliveries through St. Louis. I sent food to their drivers working triple shifts, not because I had to, but because I remembered what it was like to sit in a hospital room waiting on something that should have been there already. So when Everwell cut me loose, they thought they were eliminating a department head, but in truth, they had severed the nerve endings of their entire logistics network. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a quiet kind of focus. I wrote down names, vendors, hospitals, regional directors. I wasn't planning revenge. I was mapping out continuity, not for Everwell, for the people who had always counted on me. And as I stared at the list, one thing became clear. If I moved quietly and precisely, I could transfer every major vendor relationship from Everwell to Corbett MedBridge, without violating a single law, because I hadn't built a career. I had built the system, and now I owned the keys. The first call I made was to MedTech Surgical. I knew they'd pick up Eric Hale, always did. He'd been in the game long enough to recognize when a storm was coming, and I was about to offer him shelter. Eric, I said, I'm building something new, lean, focused, no red tape. I'd like to bring you in. He didn't hesitate. You're talking about stepping out on your own. Already have I said. Corbett MedBridge is fully operational. What I need now is one thing. Commitment. There was a pause, but not the hesitant kind, the calculating kind. Then you've always taken care of us. You say the word and we're with you. Terminate Everwell. Start fresh. One call turned into three into 7. By midnight, I'd spoken with every major vendor I had worked with over the past decade. These weren't surface-level business partners. They were relationships forged in fire, pandemic shortages, emergency surgeries, floods, and failed freight routes. I had been their solution every time. Not the software, not Everwell. Me. The next morning, the faxes began arriving at Everwell's offices. Contract termination notices. One after another. Midtech, Harrison Group, VitalCore, Logistics, Cardinal Flow. Even smaller suppliers like ClearMed Supplies and Onyx Respiratory followed suit. Each one cited the 30-day exit clause standard to the industry. No penalties, no legal gray areas, just clean, simple withdrawal. By 10 a.m., Kendra had a stack of papers on her desk and no clue what had hit her. She called Cardinal Flow. No answer. She emailed VitalCore's regional rep. Auto response. She left 3 voicemails for Harrison Medical's director. Nothing. I knew exactly what was happening. They weren't ignoring her. They were aligning with me. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything on social media. But I did receive a text from a procurement manager in Tennessee. Just heard you're flying solo now. We're in if you've got room. By Wednesday, Everwell's hospital clients were the first to feel it. Late shipments, back orders, no clarity on delivery times. One administrator from St. Mary's called Kendra's office directly. Where are our surgical stents? We have procedures scheduled. You told us there wouldn't be any delays after the transition. Kendra scrambled to reply with vague promises. We're addressing internal realignment, she said. But internally, panic was growing. She'd fired the man who knew where every thread was tied. And now that those threads were unraveling, she was left holding paperwork with no substance. Meanwhile, I was working from my home office bare bones, quiet but highly functional. My phone lit up constantly. My inbox overflowed with confirmations. And one by one, I started issuing formal proposals, exclusive partnerships, faster delivery times, priority inventory access, clean contract transitions, vendors signed, hospitals followed. Every agreement was legal, voluntary, and mutually beneficial. But to Everwell, it must have looked like a collapse from within, because it was. I wasn't attacking them. I was simply reclaiming what I had built. And I never raised my voice once. Kendra, desperate, called legal. She demanded my contact information, hoping to stall the exodus. HR denied her. Policy. She tried my old extension, disconnected, tried calling vendor reps. None would take her calls, because they weren't hers anymore. They were mine. What made it worse, what made the whole thing poetic, was this: she thought she had eliminated redundancy. In reality, she had eliminated the only person who actually understood the system. On Friday morning, I met with the director of procurement at River West Hospital. I handed him a formal rollout plan under Corbett MedBridge. He shook my hand. "We've been waiting for this, Sam. Everwell doesn't pick up the phone anymore. You always did." The next message I received was short but satisfying. From an internal Everwell employee, someone still loyal, still aware. "Kendra's spiraling, board's calling an emergency session. She doesn't even know who to blame." I didn't respond. There was no need to rub salt. The truth was simple. They had handed me the match and stood over the kindling with a smug smile. All I did was let the fire start. By the start of the following week, Everwell's internal email system was on fire. Dozens of hospital procurement teams were demanding updates. Regional partners were pulling out of scheduled meetings. One by one, the pillars of Kendra's so-called optimization began to collapse. She called for an emergency leadership huddle that Monday morning, trying to project control. But her voice cracked when she spoke. "We've had a series of unexpected contract terminations," she began, "but we're working on securing new vendors." Her voice may have been measured, but her hands were shaking. Because by that point, it wasn't just a few vendors, it was nearly every supplier that mattered. And the worst part? The legal team confirmed what she already feared. Every major contract from the pandemic era had been renegotiated under temporary emergency clauses I had written and quietly suggested. Each included 30-day termination windows, clean exits, and most damning had listed Corbett MedBridge Solutions, or Samuel Corbett, as the primary contact. No loopholes, no penalties, no leverage. Kendra tried contacting a few mid-tier vendors, ones I hadn't worked with directly. But they didn't have the inventory, and worse, they'd already heard the whispers Everwell was losing hospitals. The ship was leaking. Meanwhile, I was working late into the night from my kitchen table. It wasn't glamorous, just a laptop, a wireless printer, and a black notebook where I still jotted vendor requests by hand. But it worked. I kept it simple, kept it human, because that's what the system had always been about. The next morning, Kendra got a call from the North Regional Hospital Board. Why weren't we notified about the vendor exits, they asked. We were informed through a third-party courier that our cardiac catheter shipment had been canceled. We need a backup supplier by Friday or we cancel our Everwell contract. She had no answers, because there were none. That same afternoon, she tried going around legal and HR. She walked into the executive wing and demanded access to my personal vendor files, hoping maybe that some of the older contacts had been stored on company servers. But IT had already disabled my account, and what she found in her search were empty folders, disconnected extensions, and deleted meeting logs. I hadn't been careless, I had been deliberate. She tried reaching out to me directly through a friend of a friend through LinkedIn. I ignored it. Because what was there to say? She hadn't just fired an employee. She had fired the only bridge between Everwell and the people who actually moved the supplies. By Wednesday, the company had missed 3 major hospital deliveries, triggering penalty clauses in 2 large regional contracts. And that night, I got a text from someone inside the company, anonymous, but clearly someone who still respected the old ways. They're starting to realize you weren't a cost center. You were the engine. No reply. I just stared at the screen, and for the first time in months, felt nothing. Not pride, not revenge, just clarity. This wasn't about tearing something down. It was about letting a hollow structure fall under its own weight. And I had simply stepped out of the way. By Thursday morning, Everwell's facade had all but crumbled. Hospital systems were in open revolt. Shipments were delayed or canceled entirely. Executives were fielding angry calls from medical directors whose operating rooms were now silent for the first time in years, not for lack of patients, but for lack of supplies. And then just before noon, Kendra Vaughn called for an emergency board meeting. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 6 days earlier, she had eliminated my role in that very same conference room. Now she sat in front of 4 stern-faced executives, unable to justify how 5 of Everwell's top vendors had all terminated contracts within 72 hours of my departure. "There's a lot we couldn't have foreseen," she said, her voice steadying as she read from a prepared page. "It appears Mr. Corbett restructured several agreements during the pandemic. Contracts that technically placed him as the point of contact." The room stayed silent. Then one voice broke through, Robert Kinley, the regional VP. "You're telling us that you let go of the only person who connected us to our supply chain." Kendra opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, her assistant appeared at the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but Samuel Corbett just contacted reception. He's here. Says he has a proposal." The silence that followed was dense with something between panic and hope. "Bring him in," Kinley said. And so I walked back into the same conference room where they had dismissed me 6 days earlier. This time in a tailored Navy suit, not a department polo. Briefcase in hand, calm, prepared. I greeted everyone with a quiet nod. Sat down across from Kendra, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Thank you for seeing me," I said. "I know your team's under pressure. I have a solution." From the briefcase, I pulled out a crisp folder, simple one-page summary on top. "My vendors are ready to resume full service immediately. But only under one condition: Everwell will no longer contract directly. All procurement will route through Corbett MedBridge Solutions. I will be your primary distributor." Kinley glanced at the terms. "And what's your markup?" 27%, I said evenly. That hit like a hammer. Kendra's face stiffened. "That's Sam. That's significantly higher than what we paid you on payroll." "Yes," I replied, still calm. "Because you're not paying for labor anymore. You're paying for restoration, for relationships, for what you lost." She scoffed. "This is extortion." "No," I said quietly. "It's valuation. The market is speaking." The board flipped through the proposal. Legal confirmed everything was airtight. Vendors were ready to ship. Hospitals were desperate. And the only thing standing between Everwell and operational collapse was me. After a long silence, Kinley looked across the table. "We approve. Effective immediately." I nodded. "You'll have delivery confirmations by morning." I closed the briefcase and stood. As I turned to leave, I paused. Looked directly at Kendra, only for a moment. "No hard feelings, but next time you decide someone's obsolete, make sure they don't own the map." And with that, I walked out not as an employee, but as their most expensive vendor. 6 months later, Corbett MedBridge Solutions had gone from a laptop on my kitchen table to a fully operational logistics firm serving over 40 hospitals across 3 states. I didn't build it with flashy branding or pitch decks. I built it on trust, on late-night calls, on emergency solutions, on knowing that when a cardiac surgeon says we need this by dawn, you don't wait for approval. You deliver. I didn't rent a downtown office tower or hire layers of middle management. That wasn't the point. I brought in 3 people. I trusted Angela, a logistics coordinator who'd once rerouted a shipment through 3 states to meet a surgery deadline. Victor, a retired Navy supply officer who knew how to keep systems moving in chaos. And Janelle, a quiet genius with contracts who could see legal angles others missed. They weren't resumes, they were reliability embodied. Meanwhile, Everwell quietly recovered barely. Their brand reputation had taken a beating. Hospital systems no longer treated them like a central distributor, but a last resort. Kendra Vaughn resigned 2 months after our meeting. No formal announcement. Word had it she took a software consulting job in Chicago. I never heard from her again. I didn't need to. What mattered was that hospitals got what they needed. And the vendors, they got someone who didn't just push numbers on a spreadsheet, but who knew their warehouses, their bottlenecks, and their people. One Thursday evening in November, I was sitting in my home office reviewing reports. Every order had gone out on time, no delays, no emergencies. The system worked not because it was optimized by algorithm, but because it was run by people who cared. My phone buzzed. Tony Valdez from Harrison Medical Supply. Sam, he said, we're thinking about expanding into Kansas City. Wondered if you're interested in growing the partnership? I smiled. Always interested in good business, Tony. Send me the proposal. After I hung up, I looked across the desk at the same photo that had been with me since day one. Lily, her big eyes and quiet grin. I imagined what she would have said if she could see this. Not because I got back at them, not because I made Everwell pay, but because I built something better from the ashes of what they threw away. And more importantly, because no child would wait in a hospital room for something that should have been there yesterday. Not on my watch, not ever again. In every organization, there's someone who doesn't make noise, who doesn't chase titles, but simply makes things work. They're rarely celebrated, often overlooked, and too easily replaced by someone holding a newer resume or a sleeker presentation. But sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding everything together. Samuel Corbett didn't burn bridges. He built them, and when the company tried to cut him loose, they learned those bridges didn't belong to the corporation. They belonged to trust, to consistency, to years of unspoken reliability. And when trust walks out the door, it doesn't leave quietly, it takes everything with it. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about value, about what happens when leadership confuses cost with contribution. If this story resonated with you, let us know by dropping a quick Quiet Professionals Build Empires in the comments. It's the kind of message that reminds us all real power doesn't need permission to rise. And if you want to hear more stories like this, where justice is earned, not handed out, consider subscribing. Sometimes the strongest moves are made by those no one sees coming. Until it's too late. We'll see you in the next story.